You're listening to the Hockey 411 with your host, Brian Anderson. Welcome to the Hockey 411 here, and it's been a while, but we're back, and we're finally back with a new podcast where I believe it's episode 32, where Ken Bolke from Sinbin Vegas is joining the podcast today to break down the Vegas Golden Knights here. So, Ken, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well here. I think this team right now is a lot of fun to watch, and they're one of the best in the league right now. So they're really cool to see how it goes. We're going to break them down player by player here. So I'm just going to get your initial thoughts on the season so far. What do you think has been going on?
I mean, it's pretty much an unbelievable year for every single way you dissect it. It's just been almost outrageous that they started out real hot. They've maintained that. And we actually just published a story a minute ago where Bob McKenzie said every team goes through a losing streak except for Vegas, apparently. And it's true. They don't seem to have rough patches. They don't seem to have rough stretches. They don't seem to be fazed by absolutely anything. And when they get down in the middle of a game, you always tend to believe they're going to come back. And so it's been pretty surreal. Yeah,
I mean, I can imagine here. This team's been a lot of fun to watch, like I said before. And, going forward, it's going to be an interesting first year for them, I'd say. But the plan for the podcast here is to go back in time and go back to their beginning days, go back to the expansion draft, break it down, and then bring it up to today and, see what they have in the future. So to kick it off, we're going to go back to the expansion draft, like I just said. This was, what were your first impressions of this expansion draft? Because mine were that, wasn't on paper, they had some decent young players, you had some notable names, but I think they did a really good job during this draft.
Yeah, the team itself wasn't overly impressive to me when I was looking at just what it looked like on paper after the expansion draft. And obviously having the goalie, but even that, he didn't have his best year last year. So the thought was, what kind of Marc-Andre Fleury are you actually getting? Then, there's a couple scorers in the James Neals and David Perrons of the world. Defensively, they look like an absolute mess because the only guy with really any level of experience was Luca Sbisa. So the team as a whole didn't look like anything that I thought was going to be anything even close to a playoff team or even sniffing a playoff spot. I thought they had a really good chance of being the worst team in the NHL. But what I did like about the expansion draft was they spent every single asset they possibly could in making sure that they were going to be good for the future. They would take on contracts that were going to give them first-round picks. They were making moves that would kind of fill that gap of finding ways to get your 21 and 22-year-old players that were going to be really hard to come by with the expansion draft. They would allow teams to give them bad contracts to take on, guys like Nikita Gusev, who's still in Russia, who may or may not wind up coming over and becoming a star in Vegas or in the NHL. We'll see. They made a lot of moves that were forward-thinking, and the goal the entire way was to make the playoffs by year 3 and to win the Stanley Cup by year 6. Obviously, the first one appears to be out the window. They're going this year. The question is, are they going to win the Cup? Who knows? But the fact is, the whole time, the focus was on being good for the future. So for every single game that they're winning now, you still have to keep it in the back of your mind. They were 100% focused on being great in the future. So it's really exciting to look back at that and say, yeah, the team's good now, but all the focus was on being good later. So I think they're going to be real good later.
Yeah, in the next 3 years, I looked it up earlier, they have 3 first-rounders, which are all their own, but they have 7 second-rounders, and that's coming off a year when they drafted 3 first-rounders. I mean, that's crazy. I'm going to go with this. What was the most impactful pick out of that expansion draft? And what was the one that gave you scratched your head like, wait, why are we taking this guy? Like, I would rather have player X than player Y. Like, a little insight.
Are are we going back to what my thoughts were on June 21st, or are we going back to what's the most impactful looking at it back from right now?
Let's go. Let's start off with June 21st and then see how it's progressed. How about that?
So the one that confused me the most, and this is going to sound really weird because it's almost insignificant at this time, was Tomáš Nosek from Detroit. I thought that Peter Mrazek seemed like a pretty good option. There were a couple of veteran guys that were available from the Red Wings, and I know I had a pretty good idea of who they were possibly taking from pretty much every team, and that was a name I had never heard. I had never researched. I knew absolutely nothing about. So to hear his name was a bit of an odd one. And then I was a little bit. I don't really know how to put it. I just thought that it was not the best idea to go ahead and sign Derek Engelland at that moment. I thought that there's got to be somebody from Calgary you can take, because Derek Engelland was going to be a Vegas Golden Knight no matter what anybody said or anybody did. He was coming here, whether the expansion draft existed or not. He was going to be on the Golden Knights. So to, in my opinion, waste that expansion draft pick looked a little funky on that night. Looking back, there's really nothing that you could look back in Calgary and say that, oh, I wish they had this guy. Hunter Shinkaruk, I think is his name, is the one guy that we were kind of looking at, that he spent most of the year in the AHL, so it's not that big a deal.
Okay. It's always good to see a different part of view, especially on the expansion draft. I definitely had my question marks, but the way McPhee did it and the way he took on bad contracts, like you said before, gained those picks, is just, he really worked the table. And I'm pretty sure this is true, but they did like personality tests so that they would have the right chemistry in the locker room, which I think is really cool if it's true. But yeah, the way they built this team was very cool. But we're going to take a step into talking about some of the players right now. I'm going to start off with a guy that is probably one of the faces of the franchise, Mr. James Neal, who's just been absolutely clutch when he's been on the ice for this team. I mean, he's got 23 goals, 36 points in 53 games, where last year he had 23 goals through 70 games. So he's already on pace to be past that. He's got one more year left on his deal. So there is a big question mark with him. And I keep hearing it up, like, is he going to get moved? Is he going to get signed? I don't know. Vegas was probably originally going to move him if they were not going to make the playoffs. But now you're looking at them, you're like, oh, wait. Like, they're legitimately in the hunt. Like, they have a serious shot at the cup. They're probably going to keep him. But, you never know. You never know what goes through a general manager's mind. So that's a big question there. And I think, like I said before, Neal has been an absolute, he's just burst onto the canvas here and been an absolute face of the franchise for this club.
Yeah, he's been kind of a godsend in regards to scoring goals at the right time. I don't necessarily think I would put him up there among the best players on the team when you look at 60 minutes. I think that there's probably maybe 4, 5, 6. I could even go even further than that, of guys that I think are more valuable for the entire game. But he has this knack of being able to put the puck in the net at the right time. And it really goes back to those first 2 games. He scored both goals in Dallas when the season opened. That gave them a win that they should absolutely not have had. And we look back, and it's still one of the worst games they've played all year. And they won that game, the very first game in franchise history. Then they turned around the very next night, had to travel to Arizona. You're playing the second game in franchise history, and he scores in overtime to win that one. And that's kind of what, in my opinion, really got the ball rolling for this team. It was a team that nobody really knew what was going to go on. They had their beliefs of what they thought they were. Everybody in the media had their beliefs of what they thought they were, but nobody really knew. After those 2 games, I think that this team really came together and realized, like, guys, we can be better than what everybody's saying. And as much as they want to say it publicly before the season started, yeah, we can be in the playoff hunt, we can be a good team. We've gotten a little bit of a glimpse of what these guys were actually thinking. And some of the veteran guys like a Perron, a Fleury, even a Neal, they have made comments about how their goal was really to just be playing important games in January, February, somewhere around there. They didn't really think that they were a playoff team. They just hoped that they were better than what they thought they were going to do. And Neal's been huge in getting that off the ground and making sure that when they need that goal, they have the guy to turn to, and he's been able to find it.
Yeah, he's been the clutch player for this club. But going right now, and like you said, do they trade this guy? I mean, personally, I don't think so, but he does have that big UFA cap coming up at the end of the year.
I'd be a little bit surprised if they moved him just because his value to the team is so large at this point, and I think the return is just not going to outweigh what the possibility of keeping him is. I mean, if you were to trade the guy and not put back something directly in his place, you're basically taking the foot off the pedal and saying, we're probably going to try and win a Stanley Cup down the road. You're basically telling your team, we don't think you can do it, so we got to keep stock in the cupboard for the future. If you hang on to him, you're telling the team the exact opposite. You're saying, listen, this was the plan, was to move him and Perron and Spiza and everybody else. We didn't do any of it. We're sitting here, we're standing pat because we believe in you guys. We think you guys have something special, and we think you guys can do it. I think that's the route they're going to go. The only way I could see them moving Neil is if it's a three-way trade in which Vegas sends James to a team that is in the mix, needs a winger. There's 100 different teams. Well, not 100, but there's probably 3, 4, 5 teams out there that could make that move. But the reason I think there has to be a third team is because Vegas has to get a player to replace Neil and possibly even be better with term. So they're going to have to look to a team that's selling to make that happen. So it would be Vegas would be buying a player from a bad team, selling their player to another good team, and then all the assets would go from the team that Neil gets to the bad team.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely be the year of three-way trades. We've already had one in the league so far, so just add another. It can't hurt.
But... Yeah, and that kind of deal makes sense. Like, if you look at that deal, the way that worked out, that's kind of what I'm looking at. Where did Turris have to go? No, not really, but the way that it worked out, it seemed like a pretty good option for Ottawa at the moment. Doesn't look like it at this point, but that was their way to get in on that deal.
Yeah.
And they thought they did well on that deal at the time. They didn't, but that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, no, it's definitely along those train tracks there going in that direction, but I want to keep moving on here, and I want to talk about two former Florida Panthers in Riley Smith and Jonathan Marchessault, where that at the expansion draft, one was traded, one was picked. Riley Smith was traded to them. Jonathan Marchessault was picked. I don't know, like, if you're Vegas, this is like a godsend. It's just giving it right to you, like on a silver platter. Take these two players that have had, 50, 40-point years and, just take them for us. And both those guys have been absolutely massive pieces to this club, where Riley Smith has got 43 points this year, and Jonathan Marchessault, who just earned himself a nice extension of 52 points so far this year. So these guys have been both solid top 6 players, and if you look at where Vegas is and where Florida is now, man, does Florida miss these guys, and that just shows you the importance of them and the shocking reality that was just a big mistake by the Panthers.
Yeah, and it goes beyond that, too. I mean, there's also Gerard Gallant was let go from the Panthers early in the year last year. He's been, without question, the best coach in the NHL to this point. I think his name is already engraved into the Jack Adams Award. There's no way he can lose that thing. The assistant coach, Mike Kelly, came from Florida. The video coordinator came from Florida. They have 2 high-level scouts that came from Florida. Basically, Florida had a change in heart of they wanted to go into this analytic mode, and what happened was they wound up getting rid of a bunch of different players. Then they went back when the expansion draft came around, and they took their foot off the analytic gas pedal, and that's why a guy like Marchessault was available. Smith, I can understand. When you look at what Riley Smith was in Florida and what the contract was and the way that all seemed to be going, I get it. I can understand that one. That was kind of a reset. The Marchessault one really surprises me because the numbers were there. The analytics were there. His Corsi numbers are unbelievable and have been for basically his entire career in the NHL. So for them to just look at him and say, yeah, I don't think we're going to wind up re-signing him because he was $900,000 coming into this year. There's no reason that he should have ever been exposed in the expansion draft. And that was just an absolute mistake, and Vegas took advantage of it and have Florida to thank for a lot of what they've done this far.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely not kidding there. I didn't even realize about, the top-level scouts and the assistant coaches, but I totally forgot to mention Gerard Gallant, which we're going to get into a little bit later on here, but he's been fantastic. Both these players have been unbelievable for this team, and it's really rounded out their top six group there. But I want to move into our last two forwards I want to discuss, where David Perron coming from St. Louis and William Karlsson coming from the Columbus Blue Jackets, where David Perron, yes, he's a little on the older side now. I know he's only 29, but, in this league, it's all about getting younger and et cetera, et cetera. But he is one of the most underrated hands, I think, in the league. Nobody really appreciates him for it. Every time I see him videos, it's just bang, 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 and then just his stick handling is unbelievable. But the guy's having a really, really good year, 47 points so far. He's a guy who's not afraid to go in the corner and will go hard to the net, also while having a lot of skill with him. I like this pick personally. I was surprised St. Louis let him go. I've been a fan of his game for a while. I know he was bounced around from team to team, but personally I've been a big fan. And then William Karlsson, who's really stepped into his own, where, if I'm honest, I didn't really see this coming out of him this past year. And with Columbus, the best he had was 25 points. He's got 46 with 28 goals. If you told Columbus that, at the beginning of 2017, like, this guy's going to have a breakout year in 2017-18, they'd been like, no way we're giving him up. But he has been an absolute huge factor. And talk about a guy stepping up at the right time. 28 goals is something you cannot replace. It's just all gravy right now. And this kid's rolling. I mean, I feel like every other night or some point in the week, he's got at least a couple goals.
Yeah, he's been out of this world. I mean, he's one that I kind of, again, I get it. I can see where Columbus was coming from. When you look back, now that you look at what actually happened, they gave up a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and William Karlsson in the expansion draft. It looks like an absolute disaster, but they got out from underneath the David Clarkson contract. They hung on to Josh Anderson. They hung on to Jonas Corposalo. There were some reasons why William Karlsson was going to be a guy that needed to be moved. And honestly, would he have ever blossomed into what he was in Columbus? I don't think so, because I don't think he was ever going to get top 6 minutes, first power play unit minutes, playing with guys like he's playing with now and in Marchessault and Smith. I just don't think it was ever going to work. So at least I can understand that. On the other end, Braun, that's a guy that you look at that team in St. Louis. Could they not use David Perron right now?
Oh yeah, they could definitely use him.
I mean, I'm pumped you start talking about his hands, because he's probably the guy that's impressed me the most of anybody, whether it's on the ice, off the ice, anything about this guy. He's just a little bit different in regards to how he plays and how he talks and how he carries himself and what he's all about. And I've become an absolutely huge fan of David Perron. He's probably one of the guys on the team that I'm most impressed with. And I think that if they decide to put a captain on somebody next year, I think it's David Perron. And I do think he is going to stick around. I think he's going to sign an extension. I think he's going to take a little bit of a haircut in regards to his contract. I think people are going to be a little bit surprised when they look at his contract and think, man, Vegas got a little bit of a steal on that, because this guy loves being here. He loves playing with guys like Marchessault and Smith and Neal and Haula and those guys that he's playing with. He absolutely loves Gallant, and he's definitely a leader in this clubhouse, something that he really hasn't ever been in his career. I'm so high on David Perron, and I cannot wait until the trade deadline passes, so I don't have to hear his name in trade rumors anymore, because I think that would be worse than trading James Neal. I think that would be an absolute disaster if they trade David Perron off of this team.
Yeah, he definitely flies under the radar for a lot of people. Not many people know about him, but I'm telling you, like I said before, you go online, you look up his stick handling videos and what he's done in the past. They're absolutely, like, you just sit there and like, wow, he's one of the best in the league there. And coming from a guy who's normally, you don't really see that out of in a game, but everything that you've mentioned there, and he's become a leader, like you said. He's on the older side. There's a lot of young kids on this group, and he has a lot of experience. He's been in the NHL for a while. He's bounced around from team to team, and he's just a really fun player to watch. We're going to move on to the defense here, where here's the thing about this defense. Like you said it before, on paper at the beginning of the year, it was not the greatest to see. But they don't have a Hedman, a Karlsson, a Doughty, a Burns, like a true number one, but they get it done. I want to kick it off with Nate Schmidt, where anytime I watch this guy, he's always like giggling. He's a real character. He he looks like he really wants to be at the rink every day and just have fun with you and just mess with you. But you saw it last year in Washington where throughout the second half and through the playoffs, he really started to develop. And you're like, okay, why would Washington go after Shattenkirk when I have this Schmidt kid who's coming up? Now, granted, at the time, it's a whole different story there, but he's really coming to his own. When he was picked, I knew it was a no-brainer for Vegas to pass him up because, yes, there were goalies out there, but Grubauer didn't seem like the right fit. I think I'm a big fan of Nate Schmidt. He's only 26. He's got a very manageable cap right now. He's got 24 points. This is like his second, third full year here. He's really starting to, like I said before, come into his own.
Yeah, Nate Schmidt's like basically the embodiment of the locker room, where he just has this spirit of positivity that never seems to go away. He's always laughing, he's always smiling, he's always having a good time, he's always making jokes, he's concentrated on football. When they're playing a game that they're winning 5-1, he's still asking what the Vikings are doing. The guy is just a special character and the kind of guy that every single locker room needs and that every locker room would feed off of. And he's made it a fun environment. And then that we knew we were getting. That the moment I started researching who Nate Schmidt is and what this guy's all about, I knew they were getting that. I did not know what they were getting on the ice. They've gotten a top pairing defenseman that can do it on both ends of the ice, that jumps into the rush, that's very good along the blue line offensively, that's incredible with gap control, has a really good stick, and has been able to play with a vast majority of other defensemen on his team. He's been able to play with puck movers. He's been able to play with stay-at-home guys. He's been able to play with guys that kind of do a little bit of both. And he's always out there against the best player on the other team. It was Spiza's role at the beginning of the year. Then there was an injury to him, and it became Schmidt's role. Nate Schmidt plays against the best player on the other team for a majority of the time he's on the ice every single night. And if you look up his numbers, you would never, ever believe that. This guy's been almost unbelievable. For as good as the Golden Knights have been, Nate Schmidt's been better than they've been.
Yeah, and he's really taken command there, and I totally forgot about it when you watched him in Washington, and you see it now. He commands the power point. He quarterbacks the power play very well, I think. You said it perfectly. Plays very good on both ends, and he flips around with deep pairs. But the next guy I really want to get into here is probably the heart and soul of his team, Mr. Derek Englund. You knew he's going to be there, like you said. His kids were born there. It's grown up. I mean, you saw the speech that he gave after the first home game, after the incident in Las Vegas. I mean, when players started coming in, he gave them the realtor, this is where you want to live, blah, blah, blah. All the extracurriculars that you need a teammate to do, he's been there, and he's earned himself a nice 1.5 one-year contract coming up. He's a big, tough guy in front. He'll go down. He'll block a shot. He's nothing flashy. He'll stick up. He'll fight other players on the other team. He's just a heart and soul guy that every locker room needs. I know we went from an extreme where Nate Schmidt's the character and the guy you want to be around, but when it comes down to business, Derek Englund is all business, and he cares a lot about his teammates.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much he embodies the simplicity of what I think the Golden Knights, the style the Golden Knights play with. Their defensive principles are just unbelievably simple. Keep the puck to the outside, easy passes, easy breakouts, and then let the forwards do their thing. And he does it as well as anybody else. It's just such a simple style of game. Keep the guys away from the goal, keep them out of the slot, keep them out of the front of the net, and make it easy on their goalie. And he's been able to do that, and it's kind of rubbed off on the rest of the guys, and they've become a pretty solid defensive team outside of when they play Pittsburgh on the road, apparently, because that was a bit of a mess a couple nights ago. But I mean, they've just he's a guy that we expected. I actually kind of expected a little bit more of him locker room wise. He's very quiet, which I was not thinking was going to be the case. He's not a guy that's going to stand up and make the rah-rah speech. He's not a guy that really wants to talk after games, wins or losses. Kind of wants to stay in the background and just be the guy who's from Vegas, but he didn't really want the spotlight. So I think that he's simple. And that's a really good thing, because that's the way that this team played, and that's a huge reason why they've had their success and they've maintained their success, is because what they're doing is repeatable. what they're doing is sustainable. It's not, it doesn't take unbelievable individual efforts each night. It just takes everybody playing the right game, doing the right thing at the right times, and just not making massive mistakes. And that's what Derek Englund does, and that's who Derek Englund is, really.
You know what? It's funny you say that he's a quiet guy. From when you look at all the videos and when you look at him on the ice, he seems like he's a real leader in the locker room there. But the quiet thing kind of took me off guard there. It was just, I don't expect that from him personally. I thought he would be, just based on everything else that I see. And granted, I'm not in a locker room, but it's really surprising to hear from him.
Yeah, he's not a talker. He's not. I'm not saying he's not a leader, because he absolutely is a leader in the locker room.
In the talkative form. Yeah.
Right. He's a guy who he just goes out and does his work, and he makes the decisions when they need to have him make the decisions. And he took the role of playing with Shea Theodore, who definitely needed some work defensively. So he was going to take that role and make sure that he kind of molded Shea Theodore into the player that he's becoming, which is a stud. I'm sure we're going to get to him soon, but there's no doubt that Englund is a guy that's kind of that silent type where you need him, he's there to help you, he is absolutely leading by example, but he's not the guy that's going to stand up and scream at anybody.
Yeah, he's definitely, like you said, he'll get in front of the shots. It just took me a little off guard there. So, and we're going to get into Shea Theodore right now, which we mentioned briefly, where he's only been in the league for about 40 games here, but when you look back on it, the way he got there is that Vegas had the chance, at least without a trade, to take like a Vatanen or like a Manson, that kind of thing. But they ended up taking him, Shea Theodore, in the trade, and they took Clayton Stoner with their regular selection. And, Shea Theodore didn't make the team out of camp, went down for a little bit, and has come back up, and he's played really well. He's been a solid consolation prize out of the expansion draft. He's really stepped up his game. He's moved the puck really well, I thought, when I've seen him. He's only 22. When you get a 22-year-old that's playing top 4, minutes right now and really starting to develop and blossom as a defenseman, that's a really good sign there, because we have some, like, as you look at their Vegas's roster, like a mix of ages here, but the fact that he is on the younger side, you're seeing these flashes of brilliance right now in this past couple games, and it just shows you what this kid and the ceiling he has right now, which is just through the roof.
We've always known from the moment they got him that he was a guy that has elite offensive talent from a blue liner. He has the ability to join the rush. He has the ability to start rushes, which is not something anybody else on this team can do from their own zone as far as defensemen. He's a really good skater. He has this innate ability to be able to get shots through. He leads the team in through percentage on shots from defensemen by a mile. He's got a little bit to work on defensively still. He still has some lapses. He makes some decisions that he probably shouldn't make. But like you said, he's 22. I look back on the expansion draft and Shea Theodore, and I think he and Alex Tuck were the kingpins of the expansion draft. As much as we want to talk about the Neals and the Fleuries and even the Carlsons, the guys that were going to be impossibly hard to find, and I'm still shocked that they got 2 of them, were 20 to 22-year-old players, because all guys that were first and second year NHLers were exempt from the expansion draft. And anybody who was in that age that wasn't exempt was clearly protected because they're probably superstars. So to find guys in that range was going to be very, very difficult. And for them to get not 1, but 2 in different positions, in very important positions, in a puck-moving defenseman and somewhat of a power winger, it's really impressive that they were able to get that done. Back to when he didn't make the team out of camp, I don't think that had anything to do with talent or skill or anything. I think that was just they had 9 defensemen at the time. They didn't know what they were going to be able to do. They didn't want to lose any of them, so they took advantage of him being waiver exempt and sent him down and kind of let him dominate the AHL for a little bit. And injuries popped up and some things happened where they were able to slip some guys to waivers, and now he's been on the team ever since. So I think he's part of the bigger picture in Vegas, even more so than some of the bigger names at the moment. It wouldn't shock me if he's a guy that's top 4 defenseman for the Golden Knights for the next 10 years.
Yeah, he's definitely got the upside for it. And you mentioned Alex Tuck, where I remember when he was picked, I was shocked. I was also shocked that he was going to Vegas because I knew the upside and I was really excited for Minnesota when they got him. I remember that, when they picked him up there, and it was just, wow, they're just going to let him go like that. So, yeah, no, Theodore and Tuck, I know we didn't talk about Tuck, but they've both been really, stars for this team, and they've been not household names yet, but they're going to get there, I think, at least in the Vegas area. But I want to move on to goaltending now, and I want to move on to the Flower as we keep it rolling here, where Marc-Andre Fleury, yes, he was hurt. And actually, before we go into that, I'm going to quickly change gears. I just want to give a shout out to Dansk, Ferguson, and Lagacé, where you're going down to your fifth goalie, and I know the team rallied around it, and it was a good rallying point, but my God, if you can win games with your fifth goalie from the WHL or your fourth goalie in the AHL in your depth chart, that's very impressive. So I just want to give big shout out there because it shows the testament to the coaching, the team, and then the goalies who had to eventually come up with the save.
Yeah, I've made the argument. I think they had the worst injury situation of any team in the NHL, and I have Anaheim fans down my throat when I make that comment. But you can lose two centers all you want, but when you tell me that you're going to have to go on a road trip and play 14 consecutive games in about a month, where you're playing with Max Lagacé, who had 0 NHL starts and certainly was not ready to be an NHL goalie, and they not only made it through that, but they actually thrived because of it. It's no other team has had to deal with it. No other team has really had to deal with it in the past 100 years of the NHL. I don't remember a team who's ever lost 3 goalies in the first 10 games before and didn't get any of them back for about a month. It's absolutely wild, and it may, in a way, it may be another reason why this team is so good at this point, because they lived through that, they survived that, and they kind of banded together to be able to find a way that they really shouldn't have.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a rallying point. You saw it last year with Ottawa with Craig Anderson's wife going down with cancer, but thank God she's back. And it's that same kind of thing. You're going down to your fourth, fifth goalie, and that's crazy. But the Flower is back. He was just honored in Pittsburgh. Taking the tough loss there, 5-4. But if you take that out of the question, through 22 games, he's got a .935 save percentage and a .199 goals against. This guy's been, I know he's the face of the franchise, and he was the guy everyone wanted out of the draft. You knew he was probably going to end up there, but he's just been absolutely fantastic for this club when he's played. I know he's been hurt, like I said, but he's got some really good numbers. He comes up with those big saves, and especially for an expansion team, you need someone to lean on, and when he's been in net, he's definitely been that.
Yeah, he's been as good as advertised, and maybe even better. And the crazy thing is the part that they wanted him for, the part that he is most valuable for, is his playoff experience and his ability to have been there, done that in these playoff games. And now that that's coming up, they're going to have even more confidence moving forward. The confidence that this team already has with him back there is unbelievable. To think of what they're going to have playing 4 out of 7 home games for a majority of the postseason, and then to have Fleury in there and know what they know he's capable of. It's they're a dangerous team. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, no, he definitely proves once again why he has 3 rings to count for, and all 3 of those he was a massive part of them. Like during the season, I know with the second cup, Matt Reed kind of took him after the playoffs, but they had to get there with Fleury up to that point. So he is just a big key. And, yeah, he seems like a really fun guy to be around. He's a character. He's another character in that locker room where he's just a very loose goalie. He seems like he's always having fun. But I want to move into the backup situation where Malcolm Subban was picked off of waivers. But I want to start off with Calvin Pickard, where I could have swore he was going to be the backup, and then all of a sudden he's getting traded. I knew Subban was going to be ready at some point, but can you explain to me why Pickard was traded? Because I could have, like I said before, could have swore he was going to be the backup on this team.
Well, I think that there was a situation where they understood that they again, at the beginning of the year, the plan wasn't necessarily to be this good. The plan wasn't to have 72 points after 50 whatever games it's been. That wasn't the idea. So what the thought was was we got to start focusing on finding our goalie for the future. It was very difficult in the expansion draft to find a goalie that's going to give you an opportunity to have that guy for the next 10 years. Calvin Pickard was probably not that guy. Calvin Pickard's fine, but Calvin Pickard's he's not a star. He's not the guy that you can lean on. He can be your top goalie from time to time. He's better off as a backup. So when Malcolm Subban became available and they kind of looked at him and said, if we fix a few things, there's a chance that this guy who was I think he was a first-round pick. He might have been an early second-round pick.
No, he was a first-round pick.
Yeah, so when you look at a guy that has the tools of a first-round pick, which is very rare with goalies, and you say, if we fix a few different things, we can make this guy into a star. The question is, can we actually afford to hang on to a player and keep him at the NHL level for basically the entire season? Because if you put him on waivers, he's going back to Boston or Providence. So they had to figure that out. They knew at that point, you bring him in, we're a team that doesn't necessarily have to be a great team. If we lose some games out of the gate, not that big a deal. If he comes in and doesn't do all that well, it's not that big a deal. Plus, you have Fleury, who there's no reason why he can't play 15 of the first 16 games. So that was the idea. And then the decision to put Pickard on waivers, you had to do it. You're not going to keep 3 goalies going into the season. You're definitely not keeping 3 goalies when you have 8 defensemen that you want to keep. So they had to waive him. Once he gets waived, there was an opportunity to get something out of him. I think they had enough faith in Oscar Dance moving forward, as he proved to be pretty darn good when he got his chance. It seemed like a pretty good option. Take your pick, move on, and now you got something out of nothing, effectively. You didn't waste a pick in the expansion draft, and you wound up getting, hopefully, the goalie of the future, while also a pretty solid backup for this year.
Yeah, no, that explains it perfectly. And Subban's been pretty solid when he's been put in net for this club as well. He's not been shy, and, when people saw him in Boston, there were definitely some question marks, like, this guy was a first rounder, like, he let in some interesting goals, but when he's been thrown in with this Vegas team, he's been really well. So that explains that then, the whole debacle, because I know myself and I know others that were still a little confused on the Pickard moving, just because, I don't know, I thought he could be a solid backup, and, you always have the future in mind. But I want to keep moving on here, and I want to go to the general manager and the head coach here, where both, I think, have done a really, really good job. McPhee, always working his magic. He's gotten so many picks. At least right now, he's drafted guys that look like they're going to be really good players. Gallant's coached his team for up to, a playoff contender, which has been, all gravy for this team as well. The big question is Vegas going to make a move at this trade deadline? And McPhee's got a big decision on. I know they have a lot of defensemen. They've got a lot of UFAs. Will they buy? Will they sell? I mean, this isn't a team that you're going to sit there and going to be like, oh, they're definitely a buyer because they're playing well. I don't know if they need anything, but, they could sell here because they definitely have some UFAs going forward.
I'd be pretty surprised if they make any sort of move. Like I said, I think a 3-way deal in which they ship out Neil or Perron, I could see happening. I don't think it's a good idea. I will criticize it no matter what the deal happens to be. Just based on the fact that I don't understand how you break up a team that's doing what this team is doing. There's absolutely no reason to do it. On the same line, that there's only really one spot that I could make the argument you can upgrade, and that's they could possibly use one more scorer on the third line to pair with Cody Eakin and Alex Tuck, which is where Brendan Leipzig's playing at the moment. And honestly, I don't think Brendan Leipzig's necessarily not that guy. He just hasn't been able to finish a lot of the chances that he's been able to get. If all of a sudden things click for him, which they very well may, we will see. I doubt it, but it's certainly possible. He might be the guy. So for me, I would not make any move. I wouldn't add a defenseman. I wouldn't add somebody on the power play. I wouldn't add even that third line scorer. I would make absolutely no moves, and I would just walk into the locker room after the trade deadline's over and say, listen, we sat on our hands. We know that we have the best team in the league. You guys are the best team in the league, and go out and prove it. We believe in you. You believe in you. Go out and do it. Let's win a Stanley Cup. Let's go. And that's how I would treat it. Because honestly, any move you make, you're tinkering with something that you don't know the answer to. Right now, we know through 53 games to this point They're one of the best teams in hockey, and they're one of the best stories in the history of sports. Why would you mess with that? Why would you bring in another player and mess with any of it? I just wouldn't do it.
Yeah, no, that's those are some valid points there. We've seen teams in the past go out there, tinker with things, and it just falls apart with them in the first round. I'm going to follow up with a big question here. How far do you think this team goes in the playoffs? I mean, we could, some of their first round, second round, could they go to finals, third round? I mean, what are you gauging here as of right now in February?
I think they're the best team in the NHL. And I know that that's a somewhat biased opinion, but I think they're the best team in the NHL, so I think they're going to win the Stanley Cup.
Fair enough, then. It may be a little biased, but, I like the honesty at least. No sugarcoating.
I mean, the reason I say that is I'll challenge any team that you want to put them up against. I think that the teams that have given them the most trouble have been St. Louis and Dallas. And I think that if they wind up with a matchup with St. Louis or Dallas, which is certainly possible in that first round, then things could get a little bit hairy. But if you look at what they did to Tampa, if you look at what they've done to a lot of the Western Conference or the Eastern Conference teams like Pittsburgh, even they just played one of the worst games of the year and still almost overcame a 3-goal deficit and came back into that game. They've whipped up on Washington multiple different times. They smoked Columbus. There's a lot of teams over there that if it gets to the final, I'll take the chances against anybody, including Tampa. In the Western Conference, they've been absolutely dominant against the Pacific Division. They've lost 2 games against the Pacific, and they're both Edmonton, both of which they're not going to the playoffs. They're literally undefeated against playoff teams in the Pacific Division. That's at least one of the series, if not 2 of the series, to get you to the final. I don't know who's winning 4 games when 4 of the 7 are at T-Mobile Arena. They don't lose there. They just don't. So I don't see why they can't win the Stanley Cup.
Those are some pretty valid points here, and I'm going to follow up. Is there any specific reason that they keep winning at home? I know a lot of teams come in and they have the glitz and glamour of Las Vegas, but I've heard things that with T-Mobile Arena, it's a different rink. It's like a party in there. It's not like your average hockey game. It's just a totally different experience. Is that true? I mean, that's what I've heard.
No, there's no doubt. I mean, I just traveled to D.C. I've been to Anaheim. I've been to L.A. and I've been to Dallas at this point. And L.A.'s close. There's no doubt the Staples Center is close, but there's nothing like it because the way that the T-Mobile Arena is set up and the way that Vegas is, there's always 3, 4, 5, sometimes as many as like 7,000 or 8,000 fans of the other team. And what it does is it creates this off-ice battle of fan versus fan of who can be louder, who can be more intense, who can be more into the game, who wants it more, and it winds up spilling over onto the ice, and it creates certainly a playoff atmosphere. Throw that into the fact that, have you ever been to Vegas?
I have been, but I'm currently under 21, so not a lot for me to do there.
Okay, so you probably don't have quite the same feel, but my point is that no matter who you are, where you stay, what you do in Vegas, it's just different. Every single person who's ever been to Vegas will agree that staying at the Bellagio is different than staying at the Marriott outside of the convention center in Anaheim. It's just not the same. It has a different feel. There's a different energy. There's no windows. There's no clocks. It's just different. And I think that the Golden Knights players are used to it and used to being here and used to the energy in the building and used to the intensity in the building. And then couple into the fact that I think they're better than every other team they're playing. So I think that every single game they should have the upper hand anyway. And then you throw in that, and that's why it's turned into an absolutely dominant record at home rather than just a very good record. Because not only are they better than the team they're playing, but they're also in an environment that feeds to what they do, feeds to their scoring frenzy. They jump all over teams in the first period. They jump all over teams after they score goals. They're just a very, very good team, and the building lends to it, and the building makes it snowball. We heard a player, it was James Neal was the actual one that said it, and we asked him, what is the difference in a building that's as loud as this, that's as intense as this, because he played in Nashville last year. And he said he can't really fully explain it outside of the fact that things seem to speed up. When it gets loud, when it gets intense, when it feels like there's a little bit more energy in the building, the game just tends to speed up a little. And when you're used to it, the game is the normal speed. And when the other team comes in and the game speeds up a little, they make mistakes, they make errors, they do dumb stuff. Their goalies aren't very good, and they wind up down 3-0 before they can even open their eyes. And that's why they're so good. And honestly, I think it's going to get even crazier for the playoffs. Because when away fans come in for the playoffs and make noise, home fans are going to get even more rowdy and even more upset about it, and even louder, and bring the intensity to an even higher level. So I think it's going to be even tougher to play at T-Mobile Arena when the playoff games roll around.
Yeah, I really got to make my way out there for a game, but that's just really cool to hear, and just how it's taken the community and enveloped it, and it's just amazing how I guess they got this right then. I mean, you had your question marks. I know football is going to be there in a couple of years, but the fact that the NHL is there first, the fact that they've got the market first is just huge, and it's just really cool to see that. It's just something different, and it looks like a lot of fun to be at. But before we go, I got one more question for you. Vegas plays San Jose tonight. I believe it's in San Jose. Do we have a prediction, any kind of like score, game-winning goal? Like, what are you feeling tonight?
I think they're going to win tonight. I think that it's the final game of a 6-game road trip that started in Calgary, went all the way to the East Coast in DC, and then is coming all the way back to the West Coast in San Jose. It's 6 playoff teams in 11 nights. It's a very challenging road trip. They've won 3 of the 5 that they've played into this point. I think they're sick from what happened on Tuesday night against Pittsburgh. I think they wanted that game for Fleury. They got up 2-0, and then they just fell apart, and it all snowballed on them, and it all went south. And I think they're not happy with their defensive effort. I think they're not happy with the way that they kind of let off the gas pedal offensively in the middle of that game. And I think they're feeling really bad for Fleury, feeling like they let him down in his return. I think they're going to come out, and I think they'll score a couple early. I think they jump on the Sharks early in this game. I think they'll win the game 4-2. But I think that they'll have the lead throughout.
All right, yeah, that sounds like a good prediction there. I mean, we're going to wrap up here anyway. Ken, appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun on the podcast here. I learned so much more than I knew about this Vegas team. I knew a decent amount, but once you really delve into them, you just learn so much more. So I appreciate you coming on and taking the time out of your busy schedule.
You got it. Have a good one, buddy.
Yep. And if you're not following Sinbin Vegas, follow them on Twitter and check out their website, as long as us at the Hockey 411 on Twitter. And we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening to the Hockey 411. Follow us on Twitter at the Hockey 411 or check out our website, thehockey411.com. See you next time.